Hello.
Hi
Thanks.
there.
Thanks for agreeing to an interview. Um, I'd like to follow up on some of the other interview that I saw, and not go over old material, but I made a whole bunch of notes about things that I would have asked if I were in the room. So I want to kind of take it
Mhm.
from there. So if someone is seeing you for the first time, this is the first time they've ever heard about you or saw you, how would you explain, what your path is, what brings you to writing a book and being here on the interview?
Go ahead, Nico. You go first and then I'll go.
Okay. Hmm. Well, I think the place it starts for both of us is in our teenage years. We both came to spirituality in the form of Buddhism and the Dharma. Quite young. So I was 16 years old the first time I sat a weekend meditation retreat. And I was hooked immediately. From the moment that I walked into the meditation center, I thought, this is what I will do for the rest of my life. And I came home from that weekend retreat and told my family, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And they laughed because I was a teenager. And I said those kinds of things all the time about so many different things. But this one stuck. This one happened to be true. And so for me, I kept sitting these meditation retreats in the Vipassana tradition, the insight meditation tradition. And, by the time I was graduating college, I had done quite a bit of time in cloistered intensive retreat. And then after college, I moved into a Zen monastery and stayed there for a number of years through most of my 20s. And then met Devon and came out and sort of rejoined mainstream culture at a time when the mindfulness movement was taking off. So, 2011, 2012, 2013, secular mindfulness was gaining real traction, on the cover of Time magazine and things like this. And so I moved to Madison, Wisconsin to get a PhD in the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And people found out that I had this meditation practice and they started asking, hey, will you teach this? Will you teach that? And at first a little bit reluctantly, and then with more and more interest, I started to teach these things. And we were in Richie Davidson's lab. Both of us have worked in these kind of secular environments, teaching in hospitals and prisons and all these different places. And out of that work came the book.
It's a pretty thorough story. I can fill in little parts from my background, which is somewhat similar and also unique in that, like most, I came to the Dharma through a lot of suffering. And in our book, I tell the story about being in a sorority in college and just feeling like life was meaningless, and that there must be something more than just dressing up and going to parties and talking about dating. Or even just I loved schoolwork, but there was something that felt like, oh, there's something underneath here, really looking for meaning in it all. And so when I read Pema Chodron's book as a sophomore in college, that was my moment of like, this is my jam. I sort of like being reminded of something I already knew, really commonsensical, but it just felt like she had the answers to all of her problems. And so from the get-go, I of course threw myself in with a lot of verve. I went on retreat and I started talking to people about meditation, and really, like Nico, wanted to give my whole life to it. So there was a period there where I wanted to become a nun. And I was lucky enough to go to India and meet His Holiness Karmapa, who's the head of our Tibetan lineage. And I asked him, it feels like this Dharma path is so long and so intensive, and that we really need to be in monasteries or nunneries in order to practice. And so I want to ordain, basically, is what I told him. And the 17th Karmapa at that time, he was maybe 16, 17 years old. He sort of looked a little like deer in the headlights with that question. But it felt like a very deep connection actually that we had. And he just said to me, you don't have to be a nun. You don't have to be any different than you are already. You don't have to live in Asia. You don't have to wear special clothes. You can be right there in your lay life as you are and wake up. And he said, you just have to be mindful all the time. And it really felt like that was my guiding instruction for my life is how do we wake up right here, right in the middle of everything when our culture feels like it's against the project and identity, all these seeming obstacles to the spiritual path. But so much I think of what Nico and I do is really wanting to bring these practices to anybody who wants them, really help them make them accessible and also without losing the depth. And so this is why we ourselves are committed to deep practice and really wanting to work with folks also who are in the middle of their lives, but have the same commitment to waking up.
Before I forget, tell the audience the name of your book.
Sure, yeah. Our book is called How Not to Be a Hot Mess. And it's really a guide for being happy. It's based on the 5 precepts, the traditional Buddhist ethical guidelines. But one reason why we chose this list is that sometimes it's that, we don't really want to hear the rules about how to, like, you shouldn't lie and you shouldn't steal, you shouldn't harm. Sometimes we get all kind of mixed up in there with guilt and shame. But instead, I think the ideal of these principles, the value in them is really taking them as trainings, as not commandments, not rules, but this really is kind of a guide, an instructional manual for how to get happy. We're happy when we're generous. We're happy when we tell the truth. We're happy when we value life and we protect life. So we wanted to make it interesting and inspiring for folks. And we wrote it in a way that young people could also be interested. So, and we learned a lot about how millennials use words, which was fun too. So hopefully it's interesting and fun and funny as a book. Yeah.
So what led you on this spiritual path? What motivated you or pushed you, if you can identify that?
Well, Devon said suffering.
Yeah, it is really suffering.
That was true for me when I was 16, 17 years old. I was just a bit of a mess. I was really suffering. I had tremendous anxiety, social anxiety. I'd have these kind of like panic attacks in groups of people and have to leave the room. I had a lot of anger. I had a lot of confusion. I felt very lost. And the Dharma was my beacon. These Buddhist teachings called me home to myself. And at first, that calling home was brief moments. So it could be a brief moment with my teacher where he would say something and I would think, this is what's true, and I would have this moment of settling and feeling at home in myself, at ease with myself. Or it could be a moment in meditation, just even a morning meditation before going to school and having this brief moment where everything's settled and I felt connected to me, connected to the world. And then gradually those moments extended where I felt a little more connected and a little more calm and a little more joyful, a little bit more of the time. And it was a very long, gradual process, and a process that I'm still very much engaged in and alive in, of this kind of coming home again and again and again. And then, getting lost and confused and irritated and whatever else, and then remembering, now I know the way home. But it's a continual process.
Well, and I think for me, just to dovetail with what Nico's saying, the Buddha gave us pretty clear instructions about how to get happy. And for a lot of us, the first noble truth of suffering is really true. For me also is anxiety and social pressures around conforming to certain beauty images and how to be successful in college, straight A's, and the kind of formula for what dominant culture gives us as happiness just to me felt so empty. And when I read about the Four Noble Truths, but also this whole concept of illusion, we assume things to be permanent. We assume this solid, separate self that's somehow apart from the world. That's all delusion. It's all a dream. And when we actually sit down, like Nico's talking about, look at our minds, use these qualities of mindfulness and clear comprehension, a wise attention, reality really changes, and that instinct I had that there's something more really started to open up for me. It still is. It's what I think can keep us engaged for a lifetime of practice, is that things really are not the way they seem to be. And there's such mystery and kind of magic when you start seeing emptiness or start seeing the truth of interdependence in a deeper way. And compassion and love, our heart's potential is so huge. And mainstream dominant culture doesn't really teach us that. I think we often sell ourselves really short in this life. And so I feel incredibly grateful and lucky that we can spend so much time looking at these truths and questioning them and discovering what might be even more true, and then talking about them with other people. It's just such a precious way to live a human life.
The person who referred me to you had one question that she wanted to ask, but she's not here. She wanted to know, in these stressful times where everything seems so difficult, how do you maintain your equanimity, and what is your daily practice? What are the details of your practice?
Sort of assuming that we have equanimity. We certainly go up and down.
On a relative scale.
Yeah, so I'm sure we'd have our different answers. For me, it's the trust that I do have the potential for equanimity, even though I still have a lot of moods, and especially in these times. We live in Southern Oregon. There's a lot of fires and smoke here now. There's not enough water. It's easy to get overwhelmed with grief. And yet I see the potential of these practices to find another way. Joanna Macy says it's about loving ourselves into being. And if I can spend the morning, which is what we do in the mornings, watching the birds and really being alive in this particular moment in late October, where the leaves are just bright and glowing and also falling off the trees. Everything is so indelibly impermanent. But there's something so beautiful and vibrant about just showing up for the moment, that I can love this earth and our broken, all of our broken politics and racism and injustices and climate, that there's something about loving. The practice helps me land in the moment without denying it, without turning away, without closing my heart. And that to me feels like it's teaching us how to love right in the middle of all this. That's what the practice has always done. It doesn't deny the brokenness. But if I can learn to just stay steady and present, which is what meditation does, there's such potential, I think, for learning how to love better. Yeah.
I like that answer. And maybe I'll talk a little bit about what we do. So this comes out of a very busy time in our lives. We spent, maybe I left the monastery at age 31, moved in with Devon. And from there, we really entered mainstream culture with 2 feet. we kind of threw ourselves into being a part of things. So Devon, for example, was a high school teacher, and that was a very all-consuming career. And then also a community college teacher once we moved to Madison, Wisconsin. And I got a master's degree in psychology and then a PhD in psychology. And maybe 6 or 7 years into that 10-year process of being fully immersed and fully busy, the two of us more or less looked at each other and said, maybe we want something different. And we began to vision for our next steps after I finally completed my PhD, which took a very long time. And we thought, what do we really want? We don't really get to choose right now because we're so engaged in this process, but 3 years from now, 4 years from now, what do we really want? And we began to sit down and write out a vision for what we wanted our daily lives to look like. And we began to turn the ship slowly in that direction. And when I finished my PhD, I had the opportunity to accept a couple of pretty lucrative positions where I could have worked, again, full-time, full on, and been really well reimbursed for all of that, with all the skills that I had been taught along the way. I went to a really good PhD program in counseling psychology, learned to be a therapist and a psychologist. And instead, we decided what we really want is to have 30 to 40 hours a week for formal meditation practice.
Wow.
That's what we really want.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. That's a lot. That's probably unusual. And it's not always easy to accomplish, right? Because there's this sense of everything's wants to a little bit encroach on that, the social obligations and family and the need to earn a living still, and all these pieces we're balancing with this vision of being immersed in Dharma practice and in meditation practice, while at the same time being connected with all the friends and colleagues and students and mentees and all the people that we try to serve, be helpful to. And so these days, what we do is we try to leave our mornings open until at least 10 or 11 in the morning, and we can meditate, from when we wake up until about 10 or 11 in the morning. And then we have a work day. And our work day consists of doing one-on-one mentoring sessions with people. We do quite a bit of that. We really love having intimate connections that span years with people, where we're working, just talking on the phone for 45 or 50 minutes, right? So we do a lot of those sessions. And then we also teach retreats and teach weekly groups and do the kinds of things that a lot of our friends who are Dharma teachers do. But then we try to end our workday around 5 o'clock and shut down all our devices. And this, again, this is all just, it's a little bit of a discipline, and we don't always make it, but that there's the intention there. Okay, we're going to shut all our devices down around 5 o'clock and then have a check-in together. We try to talk to each other and then go into our evening meditation practice and spend a couple hours in meditation in the evening and then go to bed. And we try to do that 7 days a week. We don't work 7 days a week, but we try to do the meditation practice 7 days a week. And in addition, we try to do weekend retreats, like starting a Thursday evening and going through the weekend. Maybe we manage that once a month or something. Maybe sometimes, if we're lucky, twice a month, where we'll do a fully immersed weekend retreat where we're off our devices and we're just doing the practice. And so this is the vision. This is what we came up with as the right balance between being engaged in the world, which is very, very important to us, and being immersed in this Dharma practice.
Okay. I'm conscious that people might want to contact you or might want to figure out how to reach you. Do you have a website, or what's that?
We do. We have a website. If you just Google our names, it will come up real fast.
Okay.
So Nico and Devon Hase, H-A-S-E.
Okay. And probably if you Google the book, they could try to find your name if they can't remember it.
Absolutely. How Not to Be a Hot Mess. You can find that easily too.
Okay. So let's see. So I want to back up and know a little bit about your childhood. What was it like to be a child? Because I'm finding out when I ask that question, I find out all kinds of really interesting things. So tell me about what it was like to be a child.
You want me to go first?
Yeah, he
I
was
sure
passing
do.
with his eyebrows.
Yeah, great. I saw that. Yeah, I love this question. What is it like to be a child? I mean, in some ways, one of our slogans we use in Tibetan Buddhism is to always be a child of illusion. And in some ways, it's like I would love to still like honor that childlike perspective where the world is kind of new, like discovering things and everything is in this state of wonder. Um, so I'm still working on that. And I actually think I was pretty good at that as a child. Um, I remember being kind of a quiet, I was pretty shy, pensive kid that was really asking these questions from the beginning. I really loved fairy tales. I loved the stories of like realms that we can't quite see. Um, I was lucky. I'm an only child. I had really good parents, very dedicated parents, an architect mom, self-employed, and a father who had been a Catholic priest for 25 years before he came out of the monastery and married my mom. So he was always living a very contemplative life, and I admired him and tried to meditate with him in the mornings. So these questions were really encouraged in me from a young age. We used to wake up in the morning and each of us had our dream journals, and we would at breakfast share our dreams in sort of a Jungian analytical way. So from the beginning I was really raised to ask big questions. But as an only child, even in a pretty wholesome school system, small town, it was rough. Life is rough. Like trying to figure out friendships and academics and what is it all about, and working through the angst of the teenage years. As a sensitive person, I think constantly like overstimulated and kind of overwhelmed by the world. And so I think it's another reason why I really value and want to prioritize practice meditation, because sometimes I think we can have this sense like meditation is going to make us lose our edge or somehow get like too sensitive or heart filled. But actually there's this side of meditation that's like resiliency. It makes us strong. It's given me a backbone. And so I can go into difficult conversations or go into difficult situations in the world, and I feel a lot more courage about resourcing and like what I can contribute in a world that's very difficult often. So it's both. I think it's the practice is like honoring that kind of childlike nature of wonder, and also getting strong in a world that needs strong and courageous people to speak the truth and to be out there engaged in important ways. Yeah.
Now you needed to raise your eyebrows so he knows.
Me?
Yes.
So, goodness. Okay, childhood. I think, my early childhood was so sweet and had a kind of magical quality to it. And then there was, for me, a kind of line in the sand where my parents got divorced and my mother moved me and her to a small town in Connecticut. So we'd been in Manhattan, which was where I was born, and we moved to a small town in Connecticut. And there are lots of wonderful things about that. I was near my grandparents and I became really, really close with my grandmother. I would go to her house after school every day. But it also kind of marked the beginning of a really difficult time where my mother almost immediately began to run into very serious financial problems, and she slipped into alcoholism. And I was an only child with her, so it was just her and me, and it was very difficult. I mean, she was depressed and she was drunk and it was kind of falling apart for years, and it shaped my whole view of the world. And I think a lot of my early spiritual practice was basically looking for adults. Like where are the adults? Where are the people who have it kind of like figured out? Only later did I realize no one has it figured out. But there was this phase where it was really important to believe that my Buddhist teachers had it fully figured out. And relatively speaking, that was the case because, my mother was an alcoholic, my stepmother was an alcoholic, my father certainly drank like he was an alcoholic, although he was able to quit relatively easily, but he had a lot of tumult and a lot of difficulty throughout my childhood. And there was this sense of everything in free fall kind of all the time. Like everybody was always storming with emotions and saying kind of hurtful things to each other and real difficulty, real pain, real sorrow. And kind of like Buddhism was this rope that I used to pull myself out of all of that confusion and pain and difficulty. And it worked marvelously well. I also did psychotherapy, which was an enormous help. It wasn't just Buddhism alone. It was kind of the two of them for me.
Well, that brings me to something that I found really great about your book. You talked about the topic, is mindfulness enough?
Spoiler.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's not enough.
But it sounds like psychotherapy combined with meditation and your own internal workings. I mean, you had all these other things doing. You just weren't sitting down each day and oops. Okay. I'm sorry. I just got a notice from Zoom. I didn't realize we would have three people. Where was I? Oh, so is mindfulness enough? You had a number of things going on at the same time to make it work, but mindfulness isolated sounds like it's not enough.
Right. So this early in the book, we say we love mindfulness. Mindfulness is profound. It's powerful. It's the sort of foundation for living an awake and engaged and loving life. This ability to bring awareness, to bring a stable and loving awareness to whatever is happening. Mm-hmm. That's the foundation. But it's not enough. And from a Buddhist perspective, it was never meant to be enough. Right. Mindfulness was never meant to be practiced in isolation. It was always meant to be practiced as part of a context, part of a whole. And so in the book, what we talk about is that whole being the precepts, which are things like don't be a jerk, give a little, stay clear, make sex good, etc. So these are the different chapters of the book where we go into all of the life worlds that we occupy and how we need some principles. We need some kind of like heart values that are going to guide us through all of the complexity and difficulty and setbacks of a life. And I think within that, we could also say, if we're really suffering, if we have psychological suffering, psychotherapy is a win. If you can find a therapist to work with that you really match with and they're skilled, it won't interfere with mindfulness or with Buddhist practice. It'll just support it. And it might even, for somebody like me, it was necessary. It was necessary to have these psychological understandings in order for me to be able to sit down and meditate. Otherwise, I don't think I could have done it.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'll jump in also, and we're sort of using one of our teachers, Sayadaw U Tejaniya. He's a Burmese monk. He has a whole book that says awareness alone is not enough. And we're kind of using that phrase to really point to the way that mainstream culture has picked up mindfulness. And now it's everything, mindful minutes and mindful coffee and mindful yoga. Like the whole thing is all about mindfulness, but it's taking that out of a context that includes a whole way of life, that includes simplicity, renunciation, not consumerism, right? That includes right relationship and all kinds of teachings about how to live together in community and harmony. That includes all kinds of practices around deepening our wisdom and our compassion that are endangered, I think, when we take mindfulness out of context and we use it with different intentions. You know, originally it was meant to bring happiness. Now we're using it maybe to bring success or financial gain or power. There's something, we just got to talk about that. You know, we really want to honor the lineage and the tradition, because often what dominant culture does is appropriate and commodify these precious teachings. Not that we shouldn't all be practicing mindfulness. We should all be practicing mindfulness, but we should understand what the context was and its original intentions around really how to live a good life.
Now, you mentioned your teacher's book. Could the audience have the name of the book? Is it available?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So Sayadaw U Tejaniya is the author, and the book itself is called Awareness Alone is Not Enough.
And how do you spell his last name?
Tejaniya, Tejaniya.
Okay, thank you. Okay, what would you say is your most important achievement in your life so far?
When you say that, my first thought is like, we still have yet to do it.
Okay, well, that's what I said, so far.
So far.
And then we'll get to what's your achievement you're aiming for. But let's start with so far.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you a little bit more about our current practice, because we sort of, Nico mentioned, we're in the insight community, the early teachings of the Buddha. It's very much our teaching lineage. And parallel, always been for me, I've had a Tibetan lineage alongside, called the Shangpa Kagyu. And their traditional practice usually comes in a 3-year package where you go into retreat for 3 years and you do all of the cycle of teachings. And these are beautiful teachings. They're hard to access outside of 3-year retreat, and they're very precious and in some ways endangered in our times. Not a lot of people are going to go into 3-year retreat and do these. And so for us, we've always wanted to. We've talked about 3-year retreat, or our first weekend date. We're like, let's just do 3-year retreat together. That was the romantic beginnings of our relationship. But so after 20 years of aspiring, we've connected with a Lama, really wonderful Canadian Lama, who is guiding us in this curriculum in a way that we can stay engaged and stay working in the schedule that Nico described. But also, let's move for the sun, but also really complete these depth practices. And so we are now 2 years into the process, into the curriculum. We have another couple years to go. And actually in about 3 weeks, we're about to enter a more secluded period of practice. And so we're moving up into a cabin in the woods, and we'll be there for 12 months, really doing kind of the heart of this Shangpa Kagyu practice lineage. Mm-hmm. So that in some ways, on the brink of this next new adventure, that feels like a huge endeavor. Mm-hmm. And we'll see what happens, but I feel like just even being in the middle of it at this point is one of my biggest accomplishments so far.
Yeah. I'm amazed. My biggest accomplishment is I'm still married.
No, that makes sense.
I find it incredible. I find it, we've been married for 11 years, and I'm completely amazed that I just chose a very patient partner. And I think it's amazing that we're married.
you, you have an amazing amount of humility that is actually funny and interesting and beautiful at the same time. Because when I asked you, I said you're one of the rising stars of spirituality, you said, I want to hide under my couch.
Yeah, that is true.
That's such a great response to. But are you seem to be like surprised she's still with you? That's how it's sort of sad.
Well, maybe that's part of it. I didn't have a lot of examples for happy marriages when I was younger.
Wow.
And I think on some unconscious level, I always assumed that wasn't possible for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm often kind of amazed that we get to just be happily married.
It sounds like a healing experience for you.
Devon is my healing experience.
Yeah. In a way, is she sort of become one of your spiritual teachers?
Oh my God, she's my primary spiritual teacher.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the same thing for him. It's so fortunate to get to be in this process together and see the practice growing in another person and then have that reflected back. It's such a gift, He can point out all of my flaws, just like any good spiritual teacher would do.
Spouse is a spiritual teacher. There's another book. A book title in the future.
That's great.
Okay, I'm gonna stay on the couple theme because I think it's cool. What is it like to be your partner?
What is it like for Devon to be my partner?
Yes.
So hard.
Ask her?
Well, and I'm going to ask.
Oh man, it is hard work. Really hard work.
It's hard work to be your partner.
I guess both. Yeah,
that's
both
also
ways.
true. No, I'll answer for Devon.
Okay.
So, okay, the question is, I'm supposed to say what it's like to be partnered to me.
Yes.
I
used to be a marriage counselor, so.
Oh yeah. Okay, there you go.
Let's do it.
Great.
Let's do it.
I think to be married to me is to be married to both my strengths, like sort of the gifts that are here, and to be married to my substantial shortcomings. And so, I think maybe Devon probably benefits or, has some connection to a certain steadiness, a certain groundedness, and that comes from meditation that is alive in me. And then also she has to deal with the fact that I'm moody in the morning,
Huh. Well, that's
and
why she's in
loses
meditation. Huh?
Yeah, he's moody. That's why he needs to meditate. And he also loses things constantly. So, he'll come back from a trip and be like, I lost my phone. I lost my car, my credit card.
Well, wait a minute. We're supposed
lost my car.
Okay.
That's why we don't own a car. I lost it.
So wait a minute. You're supposed to talk about what it's like to be your partner. So
okay, so now I have to talk about from his perspective. Yes. I could talk from my perspective. I could tell you all about being married to Nico.
I mean, no, what do you imagine it's like for him to be your partner?
Yeah, okay. Well, I kind of know because he tells me all the time. So it's, same thing. It's delightful in that, like, I love people. I bring a lot of good people into our lives. I have a wonderful family. There's a lot of dynamic relational practice going on all the time. But I think there's also a kind of, sometimes I get overwhelmed, too busy, a little bit frenetic in my life. The burdening calendar schedule, like I think he feels sometimes like he's trying to tie down a butterfly with like our retreat practice schedule. We're supposed to be doing all this practice, and I'm like, but I've got to do that, and I've got to do this, and I have to go for a run. Like I just have a lot of sort of more dynamic energy that sometimes might be hard to live with on a daily basis.
Okay. Well, those are good answers. I think it's so charming that how you are with each other and how you are with yourselves. It's just amazing, and I think it's very reassuring that you can have a meditative practice, have a relationship, and be somewhat normal at the same time.
Sounds like
We're trying to be ordinary. It's really our goal.
How did it feel to like take off the monk's robes and all the signs that you're a spiritual person, and suddenly like you're a civilian again, and nobody knows you're special, nobody knows you don't have a title, you don't have
right.
You're not a reverend, you're not a monk.
The first thing that comes to mind was that when we moved into a neighborhood in Ashland, Oregon, which is where we live now as well. So in 2011, we got married and we bought a house and we moved into this neighborhood, and Devon had a full-time job and I was a graduate student. The first experience I had was real deep loneliness. Having been in a monastery where you're all together all the time and everything is done together in a ritual space. And then coming out into mainstream culture where there's no ritual space and everything has to be established verbally somehow, was very lonely. And I just couldn't wrap my mind around the fact that every house on our street owned a blender. It was so strange to me, like, why does every house on the block need their own blender? And now I've just gotten so used to it, I don't think about that kind of thing anymore. But initially it was very troubling to me how atomized we were, how isolated we were. Yeah, I'm not sure anybody thought I was particularly spiritual when I was in robes. So I don't know that there was a big loss there in terms of status, because I was one of the younger monks in the monastery, and I never achieved any particular notoriety or anything. So I didn't really go down very much in status when I left the monastery, because I never had it.
But I think I'll just say, in full disclosure, because you were a marriage counselor before, we have an ongoing conversation and dialogue around monastic life. And I think both of us have these periods of yearning for that kind of simplicity and being in community and being in robes. So we did sort of experimental ordination. We took precepts with our Tibetan teacher for a year, and we were sort of semi-monastics for that period of time. When we go into our retreat in the cabins, that will be another period of more renunciation, simplicity, and kind of shedding our identities of being a married couple and more like friends on the path, parallel practices. But we won't, it's shedding all the identities that we hold in this world.
Do you miss the monastic life more than Nico?
No, I don't think I would say that. I'm sort of speaking for him as well. Like, we both, have these periods of bringing it up, like sometimes with a therapist. What if I wanted to ordain? What would that look like? Right. And I think part of our trying to be creative with our lifestyle and how to really devote ourselves to practice, stay married, but also be renunciate in some ways, is an ongoing experiment. And it's rocky, it's rough. I don't love all those conversations about monasticism sometimes, because I don't want him to leave and I want to stay together. I also have loneliness in lay life. So I think it's a really open and active question for us. You sort of hit on one of our themes that we are ongoing, just continue to explore. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being open about that. I
Mm.
think that's one of the things that really, and Nick is going to crawl under the couch again, but it really is one of the things that makes you genuine teachers, because you're very genuine and you're very authentic and you're real and you don't try to hide or cover up. And that's just a beautiful thing. And it's a lot of people pose as spiritual teachers when they have a whole bunch of garbage that they're not dealing with, but they put up a good front.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I really appreciate that. It's just it's refreshing. And I think in some ways it also is refreshing to see people who are so dedicated to the practice, yet they don't have the titles, the robes, the support of the community, money coming in just for meditating. It's, you know, that you're living a real life and a real couple, and you have a dedicated practice. That's really hard to pull off.
Yeah, it's hard. It's messy. I mean, maybe that's also more of the self-disclosure is like we can't even make it look good. It's just hard, you know? And it's some of it is about failing too, you
Well,
know?
it's like you're walking a tightrope, you
Yeah.
know,
Mhm.
because, you know, the meditative practice requires a lot of effort, especially the amount of time you're putting into it and the energy you're putting into it, and then trying to support yourself and trying to be in a relationship, you know, if all that's really hard to do at the same time.
Mhm. Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Yeah, but I also appreciate your laughter and humor. It's refreshing, and I hope I don't say anything that offends you. But you know, it's just beautiful to hear how you are. It's just a great example for the normal everyday person.
Mm.
I want to talk a little bit about sort of Buddhism in a more general way, because I've had some incidents, because I'm not a Buddhist, although I've studied Buddhism for 49 years, and the Diamond Sutra is my prime scripture, but I'm not considered a Buddhist by others, and I don't consider myself a Buddhist. But in my role as a hospice chaplain and a hospital chaplain, I had sort of encounters with Buddhists that were somewhat disturbing at times. And I think you, in your book and in the other interview, you talked about sort of the coming to grips with our own lack of awareness about white supremacy. And I think there's another issue that I guess I feel need to talk about a little bit, and that there are some in the Buddhist community who have us carry a feeling of superiority. Mm-hmm. And I run into that, and sometimes it's really difficult for me because it feels off.
This is so common. I think I just laugh because I see it in all the lineages. I mean,
Yes.
we have had the great fortune of studying in many different Buddhist lineages, and it's sort of like whatever lineage you find yourself in, you're going to have a lot of people who think it's the best.
Right.
So I think it's ubiquitous. Some way, maybe that's healthy. Like they should think it's the best what they're doing.
Yeah.
You know, that's very human. But I think it's important to talk about. The Buddha talked a lot about superiority view. You know, this mental state that he called mana, which is often translated as conceit, or that sense of I'm inferior, superior, or equal to, even that kind of rating that we do so often with each other, that's one of the fetters to be uprooted in our practice. We start to see through the logic of it and realize like it's completely like not even rational to compare and think like somehow this practice is better, this lineage is better. Like it just doesn't make any sense. There's so much unique, everything is so unique. But yeah, the book I'd recommend on this is called Superiority View in Buddhism, and it's by Bhikkhu Analayo, Analayo. Just came out, just published this year. Really wonderful comparison.
It's
amongst
superiority. What was the rest of the title?
think it's called superiority view in Buddhist lineage or in
Okay.
Buddhism. Yeah.
Oh, so maybe it's an issue and that's being talked about.
It
Oh
is.
yeah.
Huh. Well, I wouldn't, yeah, I guess I'm always on the outside, so I never know what is actually going on. But I guess because, when I'm just a Buddhist by myself and read the Diamond Sutra, I can have this very pure idea about what Buddhism is. And then when I meet Buddhists, it's like, oh, it's not, it's a little bit different. The real world experience is a little different.
One of our teachers, Jack Cornfield, likes to say that, your family and friends really don't like you when you're a Buddhist. But if you're a Buddha, then everybody loves you. So it's sort of that, like, yeah, of course we identify with this, and then we get all, sticky and arrogant about this identity, this Buddhist identity, and what we're doing and who we are. But really, the whole path is about just recognizing our Buddha nature, which, like you say, is this very intimate relationship with the teachings. It doesn't have to do anything with who we are in the world.
A flag came up as you said that because there were assassination attempts against the Buddha. I don't know if you knew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not quite true that everybody loves the Buddha. I think my own spiritual teacher had 3 assassination attempts.
Wow.
One was in the United States and the others were in India.
Wow.
And so I think the more elevated you get, the more jealousy you generate.
That's true.
That's true.
And envy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So unfortunately, that's in the spiritual path, there's that issue. How do you keep from competing with each other?
What makes you think we don't compete with each other?
Oh, maybe you do. Okay, well, tell me about the issue of competing with each other. Now that you brought it up.
You want to take that one, Nico?
I mean, I actually think what keeps us from competing with each other is that we're so different. So I'm just never going to win on all of these aspects of the path that Devon is more developed in. So I just try not to think about it because I don't like to lose.
I mean, it's a great question following on the comment about superiority view, because this same mental state of mana, that's just comparing mind, right? That's based on this illusion that somehow I can rate myself in comparison to him. But the lucky part of living with your practice partner is that every day I'm reminded of what he said, like, we're just so different. Our minds are so different. Our style of practice is so different. The way we manifest in the world is so different that, of course, I do compare myself all the time, and that's painful. But when I really see the truth, it's like just totally dumb. Like, it doesn't make any sense to think that I'm somehow less than or better than or equal to, because it's just, we're so unique in our particular manifestations. Yeah.
But if you both suddenly, became monks and lived separately and, still were friends, wouldn't you lose? I mean, that would be an advantage in that there wouldn't be there's some advantages, but there would be a big disadvantage in that if you are each other's teachers, that sanding, that rubbing against each other sort of accelerates your progress.
Yeah. Well, and I guess I would say that there's a sort of healthy competition, I would say, from my end at least, is like when I see him sitting or when I see him practicing or reading the Dharma, I want to do it too. Right. I'm like, what are you reading? Oh, I want to read that book. Like, so it can be a kind of healthy motivation, inspiration. If he's sitting all morning, like, we're in silence, what else is there to do but to join him,
Right.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll say, I think there are real advantages to being a married couple practicing over being a monastic. I think there are advantages to being a monastic for sure. An advantage of being a monastic is that you get to let go of a lot of the logistical stuff. And that's, I think that can be helpful for practice, at least for a time. But the advantages of being a practicing couple, or even the advantages of being married to somebody who's not a so-called Buddhist practitioner, but just that crucible of relationship, are significant. You know, like you're saying, Devon is my primary teacher. And then I have another 5 or 6 teachers that are secondary and also that I have a lot of reverence for. But this sense of, you know, the sandpaper quality that you were talking about, the being together, or you could call it having a mirror, a continual mirror for my own behavior, where the politeness is gone, is kind of unbeatable for spiritual development. Also having other friends, you know, we have a lot of close friends where the politeness is kind of gone, where we're willing to have real conversations and we're willing to be challenged, or sometimes we're willing to be challenging for our other friends who are kind of on the path. That's the heart of the matter in a lot of ways. The path is relational.
So let me ask one last question, and then we'll be out of time. What is your vision for the future? Where would you like to be 10 years from now?
I really want to walk across the United States.
Really?
Mm-hmm. And I want Devon to come with me.
Wow. Hey, now I have a book for you. Have you ever heard this lady called the Peaceful Pilgrim?
She's my hero.
Oh, is that right?
We love her. We love
She's
her.
my hero.
Yeah, that's my background is Quaker, so she's my hero too. Yeah.
She's the best Buddhist around.
Yeah. There was an element of faith that she had. She had a comb, a change of underwear, and no money. Like, whoa. How do you survive walking all the way across the United States like that?
Yeah.
Amazing.
We've been totally inspired by Peace Pilgrim. I mean, she really did walk the path of, you know, simplicity, renunciation, a lot of selfless service. A lot of our practice is done walking. And so I think we both share this vision of like real simplicity and just, you know, practice walking. I'm not sure that I would much rather do that on like the Pacific Crest Trail or just stay in the woods somewhere. I don't know if I want to walk across the highways in the United States. But yeah, that's on the bucket list, a lot of walking. Some ways I feel like in 10 years, if we were doing exactly what we're doing now, I would be so happy. You know, we're so lucky. We get to teach, we get to practice. We have a beautiful community of friends and students and family. And there's so much gratitude I have every day. But yeah, if we can just keep going this way
Well, that's beautiful.
Going.
So just continue forward and it'll just naturally unfold.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna hold on here. Let's stop recording.